Well, I'd like to say good morning to all those who are watching this video, this learning shear of Shmuel uh, Sefer Bet, Chapter 1. Today is being sponsored by Hadassah Lavona Chapter, Modi'in, Israel. And we are very happy to have you with us and watching. Today, we're going to learn some very interesting things about the death of Shaul, the first king of Israel. So, we're going to dive right into the text, and we're going to talk about something very interesting prior to that. But I want to go to the text because I have a question for you. Just looking at the title here, does that do anything for you? Just take a look.
Well, so
Shmuel 2 or Shmuel Bet, chapter 1. Well, if it doesn't,
why
yeah,
have we Shmuel 1 and 2? Why don't you put it all in one book?
yeah, good question. That's a
That's
very
very
good
good.
question. That's exactly why are we talking about the death of of Shaul, sorry, King Shaul, the first king of Israel, in chapter 1 of the second book of Shmuel? Why do we need that division? Well, I'm going to tell you. Um, the uh, the 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 Sefer Shmuel was not divided originally by the Jews. It was
Oh,
divided up into two books by the Greeks. And the interesting thing is that it was translated into Greek in Egypt, and it was called the Septuagint. Have any of you ever heard that word, the Septuagint?
wow.
And and that is the name of the text would be eventually used by Christians in the translation from the Hebrew to Greek. And chapter chapter 1 of Shmuel Bet is a kind of fictional um, division that they decided to make into the second book. Now, it really should have been chapter 32 of Shmuel Aleph because it still talks about the death of King Saul. And we should have that together with the battle with the Philistines and with David fighting the Amalekites. And that should be chapter 32, but it isn't. It is thought that the reason for that is because it starts off with the verse, and it came to pass.
Right.
When a chapter begins, and it came to pass, like in Yehoshua and Shoftim, they start a new chapter, they start a new Sefer, okay? And so the Greeks began their new division of Shaul dying and his death with chapter 1 of Shmuel Bet. Now, the word Septuagint, many of you here, well, Septuagenarians, people who are in their 70s, it means 70. And the reason for the word to be 70, Septuagint, is because Ptolemy, the Pharaoh or the king of Egypt at the time of between the third and first century BCE, called in 70 biblical scholars, Jewish biblical scholars, and put each one in a separate room and told them to write the Torah.
Oh,
And each one of them of the 70 scholars, came up with the exact same um, writings. And Ptolemy was totally shocked and amazed that each one of them had written the exact same thing. And so the Greeks, that he had it translated into Greek, and this and it means the 70. Um so where did this take place? It took place in Alexandria. And the reason that it was translated into Greek from the ancient Hebrew was because there was a significant Jewish population living in Egypt at the time, and Hebrew was a dying language in Egypt. So we could go into the whole history of that, which we aren't right now, but I wanted to give you a little background about the separation of the two books. Does anybody have any questions about that before we go back to the text? Yes.
How many people were in the Sanhedrin? Were they 70?
In the Sanhedrin, it
Yeah.
was 120.
Oh, that number 70 rings a bell somehow. Okay, sorry.
it says 70 years is the life expectancy of a person. That was,
Wondering why he chose 70 rooms, 70 people. I don't know.
It's a very interesting concept. It's a very interesting process of what he did. There's a whole story. There's lots of stories behind all of that. Um, but we're not going to go into it. But I did want to tell you that the division of Shmuel Aleph and Shmuel Bet is not a Jewish thing. It is a Greek thing, and we are starting Shmuel Bet today. Still the death of King Saul. Uh, Shmuel Bet, if you were going to start anything, it really should have started with the reign of King David.
right.
That would have made more sense. It should have been Shmuel Aleph was about King Saul, and Shmuel Bet was about King David. But okay, I wasn't consulted, and and so
Ronda, if they were in Egypt, why was it being translated into Greek?
because the governing body at the time was Greek.
Oh,
Remember the Hanukkah story? Who came?
oh, right.
What
Yeah.
were the Greeks were sweeping into the Middle East, and for a long time, they were the ruling kings of Egypt. Remember Cleopatra? She was Greek. Um, so uh, so Greece had a very large hand in many of the translations and a
Wow.
lot of what went on in Egypt.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay. Oh,
Thanks.
okay. So we're going to get started and we're going to read the text. Um, I want to explain something to you before we start reading. I'm only going to deal with half of the chapter today. That chapter is divided into two parts. One is how David, after fighting the battle with the Amalekites, finds out that King Saul and Jonathan and his brothers were killed. And the second half of the chapter is David is David's eulogy for King Saul. And the eulogy is a beautiful, beautiful eulogy, a lament that I want to spend some time on. But the first part of the chapter is extremely interesting, and I think might take up most of the conversation today. So we'll go to the chapter and we'll see how far we can get. Okay? Does everybody remember where we left off last week? We left off that in parallel, David goes back to Ziklag, finds out that the women and children have been captured by the Amalekites and have been taken back with them, the Amalekites, to their area of their land, and the city has been burned and sacked. At the same time, King Saul is fighting the Philistines. King Achish, who had sent David back because he and his other kings of Philistia did not want David and his men fighting with the Philistines. So we have two parallel wars going on at the same time. David is successful and comes out with all the families reunited and all the spoils that he takes back from the Amalekites, and he is heroic in what he does, although the men were very upset with him because of how he left the city of Ziklag so vulnerable. They also were not happy about sharing the spoils. And remember, we talked about that being a very, very important concept that David institutes, that whenever you go out to war, those who stay behind and guard the camp and the material, the war materials, and the women and children, whoever stays behind, is just as entitled to a portion of the spoils as those who go out to fight, because you need those two camps. You need the fighters and the protectors. So David establishes that every time there's a war, whoever stays behind will still get spoils from the war. And that's a very important concept and a very, very fair and positive thing that David institutes. And we see that what's going on now is David is slowly, slowly, slowly learning how to be a leader and learning how to be a ruler in fair and honest situations where the people are concerned. So keep that in mind. And now we're going to find out what happened after the war with the Amalekites, and with David and his men come back with the women, and we're going to start Sefer Bet of Shmuel, chapter 1. Okay, now Lori, would you like to read for me, please?
Yes, of course. And it was after Saul's death, and David had returned from beating the Amalekites, that David dwelt in Ziklag 2 days. And it was on the third day, and behold, a man came from the camp, from Saul, and his clothes were rent, and there was earth on his head. And it was when he came to David that he fell to the ground and prostrated himself. And David said to him, "Where are you coming from?" And he said to him, "From the camp of Israel. I have escaped." And David said to him, What was the situation? Tell me now. And he said that the people fled from the battle, and also many of the people fell and died. And also Saul and his son Jonathan died. And David said to him, I'm sorry. And David said to the youth who told him, how do you know that Saul and his son together died? And the youth told him, and the youth who told him said, I chanced to be on Mount Gilboa, and behold, Saul was leaning on his spear, and behold, the chariots and the leaders of the cavalry had overtaken him. And he turned around behind him, and he saw me and called to me, and I said, here I am. And he said to me, who are you? And I said to him, I am an Amalekite. And he said to me, stand over me. And he said to me, stand over me now and put me to death, for a shudder has seized me for as long as my life is within me. And I stood over him and put him to death, for I knew that he would not live after his fall. And I took the crown which was on his head and the amulet which was on his arm, and I have brought them here to my Lord. And David took hold of his clothes and rent them, and likewise all the men who were with him. And they lament and they lamented and wept and fasted until evening for Saul and for Jonathan his son, and for the people of the Lord, for the house of Israel, for they had fallen by the sword. And David said to the youth who told him, from where are you? And he said, I am the son of an Amalekite stranger. And David said to him, how did you not fear to stretch forth your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed? And David called one of the youths and said, go near, fall upon him. And he struck him and he died.
Okay. Um, um, okay, go ahead, read 16.
And David said to him, your blood be upon your head, for your mouth it has testified against you, saying, I have slain the Lord's anointed.
Okay. All right, we're gonna stop there. Okay. Um, uh, does any of this strike you in any way? Is it strange, different, interesting?
Why did well, why did David have this man killed? This well, the youth
Amalekite.
killed, Amalekite killed when he really came. He brought him the news. He brought him the crown. He brought him the omelet. He gives him the whole story, and there was a request made of him. It wasn't as though he was in battle and decided on his own to kill him. He was asked to kill King Shaul.
Mm-hmm.
So why kill him?
Okay. Good question. I'm not going to answer it yet. I'm going to wait until everyone else says what they need to say, and then we're going to talk about it. Anybody else?
Well, what was the Amalekite doing there? Aren't they meant to have killed the Amalekites?
Well, the Amalekites, it's a good question. What was he doing there? It's a very good question. We'll answer that in a minute. Go ahead. Anybody else?
Well, he was the enemy. He was the enemy. He was killing Jews and everyone so he was the enemy. And that's whom we were supposed to be fighting. And he probably got away from the battle just to get away from the battle.
Okay.
And you can't give mercy. You know, we all as Jews, we feel we have to look at everything. They're in battle, and he's the enemy.
Okay. Okay. All good comments so far, so good. Okay. Anyone else?
Could we believe this youth, this person?
Ah, could we believe the youth? Okay. Very good. All right. Well, we're going to find out if we can believe the youth. Here we go. We're going to take a look at the text from chapter 31, last week's chapter, and we're going to take a look side by side to this story, parallel stories of how King Saul dies. Okay? And then we're going to answer all the questions. All right? So here we go. I'm going to show you the text just a minute. Okay, this is the Amalekite story and what he says, how he relates the story to David, okay, about the death of Shaul and the final battle. Now let's take a look at this, okay?
That
Uh,
he fell on his own sword?
okay, well let's take a look. Let's read it first of all, okay? So Linda, can you
Okay.
see this? Can you read it?
You want me to
I
read
want
the?
you to read chapter 31's version of Shaul's death.
Okay, that's right here. And the battle went sore against Shaul, and the archers overtook him, and he was in great anguish by reason of the archers. Then said Shaul to his armor bearer, draw your sword and thrust me through therewith, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and make a mock of me. But his armor bearer would not, for he was sore afraid. Therefore Shaul took his sword and fell upon it. We said last week that he
Wait, no,
committed
don't
suicide.
just read, no
All right.
comment. Go ahead. Okay. Do you see this? You understand the story here?
Yeah.
Shaul is wounded from the archers, the bows and arrows. Okay, he's dying, and he says to his sword bearer, his
Right.
assistant, "Kill me. I'm gonna die, and I don't want to be killed by the Philistines.
Right.
I don't want my body to be taken by the Philistines. So just kill me." And the assistant, arms bearer says no. Now, whether he says no because he has respect for Shaul or whether he has respect for God who chose Shaul, we don't know. But he said, no, I'm not going to kill you. And in the text, it says that he should draw his sword and run him through. And he said, because he says no, what does Shaul do? He falls on his sword and takes his own life. Now, let's read what the Amalekite guy who shows up in David's city has to say. All right, Linda?
Okay, we're up to 6. Behold, Shaul leaned upon his spear, and lo, the chariots and the horsemen pressed hard upon him. And when he looked behind him, he saw me and called unto me, and I answered, here am I. And he,
Go ahead.
oh, and he, here am I. And he said unto me, who are you? And I answered him, I am an Amalekite. And he said unto me, stand, I pray you, beside me and slay me. For the agony has taken hold of me, because my life is just yet in me. So I stood beside him and slew him. Okay.
Do you see what is it? What's the story here?
That he does it.
That the Amalekite kills him, not that Shaul takes his own life.
Oh, that's
Rhonda, wasn't there something else that he had turned around and he had seen that his sons had already died?
Well,
yeah.
yes, but that's irrelevant to this particular part of the story. The sons had died on the battlefield. He knew that. He knew that the prophecy from the prophet Shmuel had come true from the witch of Endor, and that he is going to die also. But he did not want to be captured alive by the Philistines. So that this part from chapter 31 that we read the account of how he dies is what the Jewish prophet, writes of the death of King Saul. Now, this is what the story of how David learns about the death of King Saul. Now, let's take it one by one, and let's analyze what's going on here. First of all, okay, hold on a second. First of all, what is it that we know about the Amalekites?
That you have to destroy the Amalekites,
Who was supposed to destroy them?
Israel.
No, not Israel.
Saul.
Through who?
Saul.
King Shaul.
Right.
And does King Shaul do what God commands him to do?
No, he leaves a
He
person
stayed
behind.
He leaves the king Agag alive, and he
And
leaves
that's why we have Purim.
and and that's probably why we have a lot of tsuris. Okay. Okay, so King Shaul was punished for one incident. There were three, but one of the incidents was not following God's commandment in obliterating Amalek. Amalek was the country that attacked the Jews as they left Mitzrayim, and they didn't attack all the Jews. They only attacked the weak at the end of as they left, the weak and the infirmed, and that was their way of operating. They always left behind the weak and the infirmed, and they never ever left spoils. They were takers, and they were evil, and they were mean, and they were not holy people. And so we've learned that over and over and over again. And when we learned in the last chapter that David learns about the Amalekites taking all the women and children, who does he learn it from? He learns it from an Egyptian who tells him the story. And he said he takes care of that Egyptian because he was sick and the Amalekites left him behind. They always left those who couldn't manage on their own and needed help. They were evil, mean, unforgiving, mercilessly destructive people. And this story shows many things that this Amalekites talks about. One, he would do the dirty work. He would kill Shaul. If this story is true, then we find that the Amalekite was more than willing to run Shaul through with a sword. And what did I say? They were the takers. They always took. And what does he do? He takes Shaul's crown and his bracelet, and he probably thinks, aha, I can get on the good side of David, because everybody knew David and Shaul were fighting each other. David was always running away from Shaul's chasing him. And everyone knew, all the countries surrounding knew that. It was not a secret. And this Amalekite kid probably was on the battlefield maybe as an arms bearer, who knows, or he just happened to be with the Philistines and he heard that the arms bearer of Shaul said, "No, I won't kill you." And he says, "I'll do it. I'll be the one. I'll be happy to do it." And he takes the king's crown and his bracelet and he says, "I could get on the good side of the new king." And so what does he do? He takes the king's two precious things and he to prove that Shaul is in fact dead. Now, whether or not this story is true, we really don't know. There are, as always in Judaism and in the commentators, there are always people who say it's absolutely true. The guy, the Amalekite, might have been privy to the conversation with Shaul, and he comes and he does the job, and he thinks that he's doing a favor to the king, and he's also going to ingratiate himself with David. Now, there are commentators who say the whole story is a lie and that the Amalekite was on the battlefield taking the spoils of the war like they always do. And so he came across the body of Shaul and took the two items that would prove that King Shaul was dead, and he would get a handsome reward from David because David was always running away from Shaul. But that's not how the story ends up for this Amalekite. Now, we're going to find out why. So we're going to go back to the text. Does everyone understand what's going on here? This just like there was two parallel stories about David, David fighting the Amalekites while King Saul is fighting the Philistines. Those two are stories in tandem. There's two stories going on here about how King Saul dies. One is the story that the prophet who is writing the text after the death of Shmuel, and then the story that the Amalekite is telling to David. Does everyone understand that? I want you to be very clear about that because we're going to go into the question about, well, why does this Amalekite get killed for bringing the news to David? Okay. Are you ready to move forward? Any questions or comments?
Yes, I have a question. How does I don't mean us when I say everyone, I mean the people who the Rabbanim. How do they feel about him committing suicide when we don't believe in committing suicide?
Um, well, I'm not sure that this was in time of war. He was dying. He did not want his body to be taken alive by the Philistines because he knew that it would be mutilated, and which it was. We know it was, and I'm not sure that in time of war
Okay.
that is as serious as perhaps in times of not war.
Okay.
It's happened since then at Masada, where there was a siege.
Right.
Um,
Right.
There you.
Exactly.
Okay.
We can't use we cannot use our 21st century lenses to view the Tanakh, because a lot of the things that we know today and hold true today don't apply back in the history and under those circumstances.
Okay.
Okay, so let's go back now to the text. We're gonna, okay, so All right. You ready? We're going to take the pasuk by pasuk. So David has come back from the war successfully to Ziklag, which is in Philistia, where he was currently living, and he's there 2 days. And on the third day, he sees this person who is, in garments that are torn, and his head is full of dirt. And we've heard that many, many times in the Tanakh, where people who are mourning put on sackcloth and put ashes and dirt on their head as a sign of mourning. So if you believe that this Amalekite was telling the truth, then he was respectfully coming from the battlefield to tell, what he thought was going to be a good story. If you believe he was not telling the truth, then perhaps he did this to look the part of someone who cared about what had happened, when probably he didn't. Okay, so it says that he comes and his clothes are torn and he's got dirt on his head. And David said to him, where were you coming from? And the guy says, from the basically he tells him, I'm coming from the war with the Philistines. I escaped. And David is concerned, suspicious, and he says to him, what was the situation? What was going on? He wants to know the status of what the war was, what was like. So the Amalekites is happy to tell him, and he says the people fled the battle, and if they didn't flee, they were killed. And by the way, not only were the people killed, but P.S. Saul and his son Jonathan. Now he doesn't say the other sons. He just mentions Jonathan because he knows that that David was good friends with him. Perhaps he felt he would get more brownie points by telling him about Jonathan and King Shaul. And by telling him about Shaul, he would, David would be thrilled because he had been running away from him for over 10 years. And because he tells him about Yonatan, he thinks he'll be so sad that he'll be grateful to him that he gave him the news. So then it tells us, and then the youth continued that he came to Mount Gilboa. That's where the fighting was. Don't forget that the Philistines were in Shunem and the Israelites were on Mount Gilboa, and they that's where the battle was taking place. And he tells the story about how the cavalry. Now he says the chariots and the cavalry. Well, that's not what the story prior to in the chapter said. It said the archers. That Shaul had been wounded by the archers. Now, okay, so if you want to give this guy a little credit, you can say, okay, so he thought it was the cavalry. It didn't matter what it does. Cavalry, archers, what the difference? Okay, but that's not what happened. All right. And it said, and he turned around behind him and he saw me. And he said, and he calls me over, and he said, and I said, here I am, like, what can I do for you? he didn't say, oh, and I rushed to help him and take care of him and see if I could help his wounds. He didn't say, that he was going to help him. That's not what Amalekites do. And then he says to him, who are you? And he said, I am an Amalekite. Now, that is the last word that Shaul hears before he dies. Amalekite. How ironic. David is fighting the Amalekites in a war, a successful war, while the Philistines are fighting King Shaul, and on his dying breath, he says to this person, who are you? And he says, I'm an Amalekite. Can you imagine? I mean, reading this story is so tragic for Shaul. The last thing he needs to hear is Amalekite. And then we find out that he says, run the sword through me. I have so little life in me. I know I'm dying, and I want you to kill me. And this kid says, and I stood over him and I put him to death. And he did the deed. And he sounds happy that he assisted King Saul in his death. And David takes hold of this kid, and he's so upset, and he tears his clothes, and he's very, very upset about Shaul dying, and Yonatan is also, and he says to his men, they're lamenting him. They're lamenting the king. Now, why do you think they're lamenting the king? Anybody?
Why do you think who's lamenting the king?
It says, and David, let's see, and David lamented here, and they lamented and wept and fasted until evening.
Well, he was their leader.
He was the king, but who appointed him king?
Hashem.
Who?
Hashem.
God.
Yeah, Hashem.
God chose him.
Right.
God tells Shmuel, the people want to be like all the other nations. They want a king to fight their battles. I can't fight these people any longer. It wasn't all about you, Shmuel. You did a great job as prophet. You took my word and carried it throughout the country to the people of Israel. You did everything you were supposed to do. But the people are not satisfied. They want to have somebody as the head of the country, and I'm going to give them from the tribe of Benjamin. I am going to give them this guy who is head and shoulders above everyone, head and shoulders in his knowledge of Torah, head and shoulders in his stature and his appearance, and he will lead the people as the first king of Israel. God had high hopes for him. He really did. But he was sorely disappointed. So
Rhoda, sorry. God knows everything. God knew what he was going to be in the future. So
yes,
why did he appoint him?
because God, although God lives in the past, present, and future all at the same time, He
We still
always
have free will.
allows us free will to change the course of history.
Yeah,
Right.
but he
And
was the one who chose Shaul, wasn't he?
yes,
It was
yes,
God who chose it.
yes, he was, but he allowed Shaul to make those decisions for himself, even though he knew what was going to happen. And that's
So,
why he withdrew his Ruach HaKodesh after King Saul started to not listen to God's commands and to
but then
Shmuel.
didn't King Saul lose his connection totally with Hashem?
Yes, he did.
He
That's
did.
why he went to the witch of
Right.
Endor, because it says, and he consulted God and God didn't answer him.
Oh, right. Okay. Thank you.
What was it that there
What?
was an army of Amalekites when King Saul had killed them all except the king?
No, they were fighting the Philistines.
So
Yeah, but David was with the Amalekites.
What?
Wasn't
what was
David? Maybe I'm getting confused.
Yeah, David is fighting the Amalekites. Saul is fighting the Philistines.
Right.
Yeah,
uh,
well, how did they have enough Amalekites to have an army when they'd all been killed by Saul?
Well, they weren't. Clearly, they weren't. They weren't killed by Saul.
But he
Oh,
left
He
someone else.
left. He left more than just the king. Because
oh.
we hear about that now. We're hearing about the Amalekites. They didn't just spring up out of the earth, after they were killed. He left quite a bit. He did not obliterate them.
Hmm.
Which is what we're doing now.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's a whole new ball game.
That's a whole new parsha.
Yeah.
Okay, so now it says now after they sit and mourn for the time that they hear that King Saul is dead, and for Jonathan, they David says to this person again. He said, "Where are you from?" Now he's already asked this. He's already said, "Who are you?" And now he's saying, "And where are you from again?" Like he really wants to make sure where this person is from. Now, do you think that after fighting the Amalekites, after they had just taken the wives and children, that David is favorably disposed to them? No. And he also knows that Shaul was commanded to kill all of
Kill
them.
them all.
And David knows Torah and he knows the history of the Amalekites. So David then says to him, how did you not, let's see, what does this say? Can someone read that line right here, 14?
How did you not stretch forth your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed?
Right, he says, exactly. He says, you weren't afraid to kill God's anointed king? This was not any Joe Schmo on the battlefield that you could pluck the spoils from. This was God's anointed. And it's here that we have to really show respect for David. He, until the very end, is respectful of Shaul because God chose Shaul. David was never going to kill him, no matter how many times they had
Right.
encounters with each other, no matter how many opportunities David had to kill Shaul. We know about the cave. We know about David going into the camp where Shaul was sleeping, and he takes his spear and he cuts his uh, garment. We know all the years that he was running away from him, that David could have easily killed Shaul and ended the torture that Shaul was putting him through. But he didn't lay a hand on him for two reasons. He was
Because Hashem appointed him.
and because Yonatan was his best beloved
Right.
friend. And while the relationship between Yonatan and Shaul were often challenging, because Shaul, told his son, I want to kill David. And he couldn't, and Yonatan couldn't believe it. And so consequently, Yonatan had to often choose one over the other. And we saw at one point Jonathan going back to his father to find out if he really wanted to kill David. And when he found out that, yes, in fact, he did want to kill David, that's when he helps David escape. So this was a very challenging father-son relationship. But here we have the Amalekite thinking that he did a great thing. And he said, he gives the account of how he struck Shaul. So then David said to one of his men, go and kill him, because the Amalekite thought that David would be thrilled to hear this news, and that by giving him the crown and the bracelet that Shaul wore would be proof positive that Shaul was dead, that his nemesis was dead, and that David would be very excited. And as the new king, he would grant whatever to very positively to this Amalekite. But in fact, David was mortified that he killed God's anointed one, and he has one of his men kill him, the Amalekite. And as I guess he's dying, or after he died, what does David say to him? Right here. Let's see.
Yeah.
On
Yeah.
your head.
16.
16 it is, right.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
What does it say?
I
Your
think
Blood.
your blood be upon your head, for your mouth has testified against you, saying, I have slain the Lord's anointed.
So it said, you're the one who came and told me your blood will be on your head, not me killing you, but what you came to tell me and what you did. This is your just reward. And he has him killed.
Right.
So what are your thoughts here about what transpired?
Wait, I have a question to make something clear in my mind.
Okay.
It's true that David was fighting the Amalekites and Shaul was fighting the Philistines at this point.
Right.
Okay, so what was this Amalekite kid doing with the Philistines?
Well, what did I tell you about one of the characteristics of the Amalekites? They were scavengers. They would probably during a battle or when a battle was almost over, they would go on the battlefield and start taking everything, anything and everything from the dead people, the wounded people. They probably killed the wounded because they didn't care about the wounded. They didn't offer them assistance, and they probably they left the people behind, and they took whatever they could take.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Why did David have somebody kill the Amalekite and he didn't do it himself?
Good question.
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I really don't.
Because a king doesn't kill a king.
No, but he was only a messenger. He was only, he
this
wasn't a high caliber.
this is a perfect, just
That's a very good.
as an aside, we often say, don't kill the messenger,
Right.
Well, this is a perfect example of that. Okay. Any other comments?
And he probably didn't just kill, he killed in battle. Somebody, I'm guessing, somebody fighting him. He would tell his man, to kill somebody else. But if somebody was fighting him as in battle, then he would be killing. That's what I'm imagining.
Who are you
No,
referring to?
no, that was, it wasn't in the middle of battle.
Well, when David was in battle, they were fighting him. This guy wasn't. He was just talking. So his status wasn't like he was combating with him. You know what I mean? He was the enemy. But it was a guess.
Okay. So I think what we have seen here is many things in this particular segment of the chapter, because the next part of the chapter is the eulogy, the beautiful, beautiful eulogy that when we read it, you're going to say, oh, I know those lines. I've heard them many times before. We're going to do that next week. But what we've learned today, what we can take from this, this very tragic story. It's tragic no matter who killed Shaul, whether Shaul runs himself through, with a sword, or whether this Amalekite. We don't know exactly which one, but perhaps this story is put into this part of the Sefer as a warning. I look at it as, look what happens to the mightiest person of the kingdom, the king himself, when he doesn't listen to Hashem, the king and creator of the universe. This is what happens. And as a result, the thing that Shaul neglected to listen to Hashem about comes back and is the last thing that he hears and sees before he dies. It's poetic irony, perhaps it's a story with a purpose, that this is what happens to those people who don't listen to Hashem, follow his orders and commandments. Perhaps it's true. We don't know. But I think that it rings true on many levels of the type of people that the Amalekites were, who they became, and who they still are. And I think that this is one of the most tragic stories of one of our leaders that that begins the period of the kings, the Malachim. And it's very sad. It's very, very sad. And it certainly doesn't set the tone in a good way for the history of the 400 years that there were kings in Israel. So
Does David become king right away?
we're going to find that out.
Oh,
The answer is no, not right away. But let's take a look, his life, David's life, had this conflict with Shaul not happened, would have been very different, because David was a hero. He was rewarded by Shaul with Shaul's daughter, Michal. And
Right.
because Shaul was so distraught, he takes the wife away from David. Maybe they could have bought a little house in the Golan and lived happily ever after in the yeshuv, in a community, and had beautiful children. And David could have written poetry and shepherded the sheep. But Shaul stole David's life as well.
True.
And it doesn't say anything about his love for the other women until we get to Bathsheba. So Shaul takes other people's lives based on his unstable mental condition, his fear, his anger, his worry, his jealousy. These are all feelings that he had. He was upset that his children would not have the kingship. He was upset that God had left him. He was upset that his people didn't respect him. He was upset at everything. He was not well. And it was tragic how he lives his life as a human being and as the king of Israel. Okay?
Okay.
So we're going to end here. I'm going to stop the recording.